In the Fertile Crescent of ancient Mesopotamia, under the vast expanse of a sky that turned from the bright azure of day to the deep indigo of twilight, the city of Sodom stood. It was a city known not just for its bountiful trade and opulence, but also for the shadows that crept through its streets at night, shadows cast not by the setting sun, but by the deeds of its people. Lot, a man of considerable virtue and the nephew of the revered patriarch Abraham, had made his home here, near the bustling gates where merchants shouted over the braying of donkeys laden with goods. As evening approached, the air filled with the spicy aroma of market foods and the less savory scent of crowded, sweaty bodies. Lot observed it all from his seat at the gate, a position of respect and authority. It was during one of these evenings that two strangers appeared at the gates. They walked with the calm assurance of those who are protected, yet there was an understated urgency in their stride. Lot, sensing something different about these men, rose to greet them. Their robes, though dust-covered from travel, hinted at a purpose beyond ordinary business. Lot invited the strangers into his home, insisting, despite their initial refusals. Sodom was not kind to strangers after dusk, and Lot, bound both by duty and a deep-seated fear of his neighbors' less honorable intentions, would not hear of them spending the night in the open square. Inside Lot's home, his wife busied herself with preparations, her movements quick and quiet, a contrast to the growing noise outside as night fell. The house, modest yet clean, was soon filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and stewed meat. Lot's daughters, two young women who had grown up amidst Sodom's wealth and corruption, watched the strangers with curious eyes, sensing the tension that their father tried so hard to mask. As they ate, the mood was somber. The visitors ate little, their eyes frequently meeting, sharing silent conversations. Lot watched them, his mind racing with questions about their origins and purpose. No sooner had the plates been cleared than a shout arose from outside, a shout that turned into a chant, then a cacophony. The men of Sodom, young and old, surrounded Lot's house, their faces illuminated by torchlight and twisted by desire. They pounded on the door, voices raised in a demand for the strangers to be brought out to them. Lot's heart sank. The city's wickedness was no secret, but never had it so boldly darkened his doorstep. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him to face the mob alone. His words were firm, yet tinged with desperation, as he pleaded for the safety of his guests and offered a horrifying alternative, his own daughters. The response was a surge forward, a wave of anger that threatened to break down not just the door, but all semblance of humanity. Just then, the door swung open, and the visitors, angels in the guise of men, pulled Lot back inside. A blinding light flashed from their hands, striking the mob with sudden blindness. Confusion and screams filled the air as the divine messengers secured the door against the now helpless crowd. In the quiet that followed, the angels revealed their true nature and their grim mission. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah had reached the heavens, and they were to be destroyed. Lot's family was to flee, to not look back, and to not stop until they reached the safety of the mountains. The night was still dark when Lot, his wife, and their daughters fled the city. Behind them, the ground trembled, and a terrible roar filled the air as fire and brimstone rained down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's wife, overcome by a mixture of fear and sorrow, turned back to look and was instantly transformed into a pillar of salt, a lasting monument to the cost of disobedience. The road to the mountains was treacherous, and by dawn, the small family, -1, found themselves alone in the world, their city a smouldering ruin on the horizon. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden light that seemed at odds with the darkness of their plight, Lot and his daughters reached a small cave in the foothills of a nearby mountain. It was a harsh and unwelcoming place, but for Lot, it was a refuge from the destruction of his past life. The cave, cold and damp, became their makeshift home as they grappled with their sudden isolation and the enormity of their loss. Lot sat at the entrance of the cave, staring out at the landscape that had changed irrevocably. The fertile plains they had left behind were now just a memory, obscured by the divine wrath that had consumed Sodom and Gomorrah. His daughters, huddled together inside, whispered about their uncertain future. They were alone, seemingly the last people on earth, with no one to marry, and no hope for the future of their family line. As days turned into weeks, the isolation wore on them, The sisters, once lively and hopeful, grew despondent. One night, under a sky littered with stars, the elder daughter broached a plan so shocking that it would seal their fate in history. Believing that they were the last humans left, she proposed to preserve their lineage through their father, Lot. The plan was simple yet horrifying. They would intoxicate Lot with wine from the stock they had salvaged from Sodom, ensuring he would be unaware of their actions. The younger sister, though initially horrified, eventually acquiesced, driven by desperation and the echoing emptiness of their cave. The following night, with a heavy heart and trembling hands, the elder daughter carried out their plan. She mixed a strong, sweet wine and gave it to Lot, who, worn down by grief and the burden of survival, drank deeply. That night, under the influence of the wine and shrouded in darkness, the boundary between father and daughter was crossed in an act driven by a misguided duty to continue their lineage. The next morning, as the sun pierced the shadows of the cave, Lot awoke with a heavy head and no memory of the night's events. His daughter, however, faced the dawn with a mix of relief and immense guilt, knowing what she had set in motion. Encouraged by the success of the first night and driven by the same desperate logic, the younger daughter followed in her sister's footsteps the following night. Again, Lot was plied with wine, and again he unknowingly participated in another act that would have profound implications for the future. As the second daughter took her turn in the grim ritual they had devised, the foundation of future nations was laid in those moments of despair. These acts, concealed in the darkness of the cave, would later birth Moab and Ben-Ami, ancestors to the Moabites and the Ammonites. In the cold light of morning, Lot faced his daughters. The truth of their actions, though unspoken, hung heavily between them. The daughters, burdened by what they had done, struggled with their choices, yet knew there was no undoing the past. Lot, for his part, grappled with the implications of their isolation and the weight of their survival. In the days that followed, the family adjusted to a new reality, one marked by the consequences of their choices. They were a family bound not just by blood, but by the secrets of those 2 fateful nights, a legacy that would shape their descendants for generations. As the seasons changed, the stark reality of their actions began to manifest. The elder daughter, the first to conceive, gave birth to a son named Moab. This child, born out of desperation, represented a new beginning, but also a constant reminder of the moral compromises they had made. The younger daughter soon followed, giving birth to Ben-Ami. Together, these children were the progenitors of the Moabites and Ammonites, nations that would have complex and often contentious relations with the descendants of Abraham. The births marked a turning point for Lot and his daughters. While the initial shock of their actions had faded into a resigned acceptance, the presence of these children brought new challenges and responsibilities. They raised Moab and Ben-Ami in the shadow of the mountains, far from the ruins of their former lives. But the legacy of how they came into the world lingered like a silent spectre. Lot often found himself gazing out towards the horizon, where the pillars of salt that once were Sodom and Gomorrah stood as grim reminders of divine wrath and human frailty. He pondered the divine justice that spared his family, yet allowed them to fall into such moral ambiguity. His faith, once unshakable, now wrestled with the harsh lessons of survival and sacrifice. His daughters, now mothers, faced their own inner turmoil. They taught their sons about their great-uncle Abraham and the God he served, instilling in them a sense of identity and legacy, yet they could never fully articulate the circumstances of their conception. The secret of their lineage was a heavy burden, one that shaped their teachings and their hopes for their children's futures. As Moab and Ben-Ami grew into young men, they were filled with questions about their origins. Their mothers, cautious with the truth, focused on teaching them the skills needed to survive in a harsh landscape: hunting, farming, and the lore of their ancestors. Yet the boys sensed the unspoken shadows that sometimes darkened their mother's eyes. Moab, the elder, showed a keen aptitude for leadership and strategy, traits that would one day help him establish his own people. Ben-Ami, more introspective, often wandered the hills, pondering the nature of man and God, reflecting a deep-seated need to understand the moral complexities of their world. Years passed, and the small family eventually encountered other survivors and wanderers. These meetings were cautious, but ultimately fruitful, leading to alliances and the slow spread of what would become the Moabite and Ammonite nations. Lot, seeing his grandchildren flourish, felt a mixture of pride and sorrow, wondering about the divine plan that wove through their lives. The legacy of Moab and Ben-Ami, rooted in controversy but forged in survival, carried with it both the weight of the past and the promise of the future. Their descendants would interact with the Israelites, both as foes and allies, in a narrative that was as complex as the circumstances of their forefathers' origins. In his old age, Lot often reflected on the journey from Sodom to the solitude of the mountains. The decisions made in moments of fear and desperation had led to the birth of nations. Yet, the moral ambiguities of those decisions remained a topic of contemplation for Lot, his daughters, and their descendants. The story of Lot and his daughters challenges us to consider the extremes to which we might go to preserve our future and the moral costs of such decisions. It serves as a profound narrative on human nature, divine intervention, and the inescapable consequences of our choices.